Prinal, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker for today, Mr. Arvind Kamna, who is going to take us through his foundation, Happy World Foundation, and teach us more about the opportunities and challenges of social entrepreneurship. He qualified CMA, CS, and MBA in banking and finance. He was a part of corporate world for 25 years as he worked in companies like IBM, HP, Infosys, iGate, Tramco, etc. Then his purpose of life shifted towards social and education related initiatives. He founded VedicShala.com in 2015. Later, he associated with NR Group. Further, he was a part of Inspire India and Design of Life programs for from Shankar Mahadevan Academy Trust. Currently, he is the strategic advisor and consultant of Happy World Foundation. We are grateful to have you here, sir. Your life is an inspiration for many of us. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of everyone, I welcome you for this lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Prinal. I'll now open the slides.
Yeah.
Yes, sir,
So,
sure.
so Arvind and I, we both were together in IBM. So we are, ex-colleague when we worked together.
Take some time. So I wanted to start with this screen, and thank you, Prinal. Thanks, Sharath, for inviting me for this session. I'm really glad to be talking about my journey, actually. Maybe I'll not talk much about the entrepreneurship side. Maybe it will come later. But I wanted to talk about my journey, like how I shifted from corporate to the social world. So if you see the first slide here, you will see 2014. Where was I? I was in Beijing, China. Of course, today saying anything about China is taboo in India today. But yeah, I was in IBM China for a leadership program. I was delivering a lecture to the IBM China folks there. 2014, and you see 2019. Where am I? In a village, Ramohalli village, close to Bangalore, where there are about 80 girl students studying in a Gurukula, where I teach them spoken English, Vedic maths, general knowledge, of course, computers. And in return, I learn Sanskrit from them because Sanskrit is my passion, and I learn Sanskrit from them because they speak only Sanskrit in the Gurukula. So that's what I wanted to start with, the first slide. This slide, Prinal has already done a great job. She has covered the entire journey from my 25 years in the corporate world till today. But I'll not dwell deep into my corporate world. I'll talk about what motivated me to come from the corporate to the social sector. Okay, so if you make it more interactive, so what is this you see in front of you? What do you slide called what motivated me to move from corporate to social sector?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
we can see
Yes.
it now.
So I wanted to make it interactive. So I want to ask you this question. What does this indicate? The one on the right side. Anyone can?
Sir, is it Maslow's need
Yeah,
hierarchy?
exactly. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you see here, you see the top portion, which is self-actualization, and I'm going to talk about that, which is on the left side. So moving away from the corporate world. So it gives a very secure life, but yeah, one that is dictated by the organization goals. It does not give us enough freedom, to pursue a plan or an idea of our own. And of course, after a certain age and certain number of years of experience, there is a sharp decline on the learning front, with more reliance on others to help you with tasks. So that is called the delegation in corporate terms. You start delegating, and there is a sharp decline on the learning front for you. You only become a leader or a manager. The chances of being replaced is also very much high, as the risks are low for the organization. So if you see today, most of the people who are getting the boot in the corporate sector or in the IT sector are those who are program managers or managers, not with the niche skills. So people with niche skills are still required in the organization. And you'll always find someone managing you who does not have any clue on the domain or on the functional area that you are involved with. And of course, there is very intense rat race in the corporate world, about promotions, about increments, about so many things. Oh, he has gone abroad for a conference, I have not gone. So this kind of rat race, these things keep happening in the corporate world. So what happens next? After certain years of experience that you put in, you want to break the routine or the status quo. That happened to me. So I wanted to break this routine or the status quo, and then the thought process changes completely. And I coined a word called corporate sannyas. So that suddenly struck me that I should take sannyas from the corporate world, and I should take up something that not just makes me happy, but also benefits the society as well. And by taking up a social cause that we are all very passionate about, so that is what made me think about leaving the sector, the corporate sector. And of course, there's a strong belief, to be a change that we wish to see in the world. So we know the famous statement from Mahatma Gandhi, that be the change you wish to see in the world. So when you have that strong belief that you want to be the change, and see, rather than be an outsider and just comment or just criticize, rather if you want to be the change in the world, then yeah, you have to come out of the status quo. So I found my calling in 2015. It was exactly about 5 years ago, when I was with IBM. And that's when I decided to take the corporate sannyas and to seek the purpose of my life. So what was my purpose of my life? It was basically to make the underprivileged rural youth self-sufficient and capable through education, so that they may lead a life of dignity and fulfillment. So if you have seen today, in the post-COVID world, after the COVID pandemic has struck us, we have seen how many people have moved from the cities to the migrants. I mean, who have moved from the cities to their own hometown or their rural village. We have seen that, but now we don't know what is going to happen next, because some of them are again planning to come back. But what about those who really want to stay there? Are we creating any opportunities for them? Are we creating any opportunities where they get employment, where they stay back in the village and not come back to the city? So all these things are going on, and this is what I'm going to talk about it later. That what Happy World Foundation is planning to help these rural youth. So I'll come to the next slide. So what were the challenges? What are the challenges that come in your life, and how do you overcome that? So you see, the first one, never time your exit from the corporate world. So this is about my experience again. I never timed it. I never said, okay, after 2 years, after 3 years, I'll come out. I didn't plan that way. It happened instinctively to me. And all of a sudden, backed by some trigger or some, in Hindi we say kida. I'm sorry, I'm using that word, but there is something that, makes you do something different, want to be the change. You want to chase your passion. Yeah, so that is something that happened, and I decided, okay, let me come out of it. So what were the challenges I was mentioning? I said, never time your exit from the corporate world. Secondly, you should be convinced of it. This is very important, actually, that unless you are convinced, you cannot convince others. Especially, you have to take along your spouse or your parents. In your case, maybe the parents. You might be too early for to be to have married, but your parents, they should be convinced of this decision. The third most important thing is coming out of the shackles. Some of the shackles like EMI. This is the biggest worry that people have. I've got EMI, so how can I come out? Or some people might even say, my children's education is more important, so how can I come out? So these are certain things that will not allow someone who has worked in the corporate industry, corporate sector, to come out so easily. And these are some things that somebody has to plan in advance before coming out, and you have to be ready to make a lot of sacrifices. It's not just about people coming from corporate. Even those who are getting into social entrepreneurship, they have to make a lot of sacrifices. They should not think that yeah, I'm in a comfort zone. There's no comfort zone in the social sector. Absolutely no comfort zone, because you have to be on your toes 24/7, 365 days is my experience. Perhaps comparatively in the organization or in the corporate, you might have certain time limit. Although people say they work 24/7, but you still have that leeway, but not in the corporate sector, in the social sector. So here you have to be almost always be 24/7, 365 days. You should be ready. And sacrifices can also be monetary sacrifices that you have to make. You may also have to make some sacrifices on the long holidays or vacations. A lot of these things will be involved. And you have to be firm in your decision, because sometimes it so happens that you jump into this world and then you realize, oh, that was such a good world, such a cushy, I was leading such a comfortable life. I may want to go back. But yeah, if you go back, perhaps you'll never come back to the social sector. So once you decide to jump, you have to jump. You cannot take back your no, that leap. So if you see here in the slide below, who am I and who I want to be, the leap of faith that you have taken. So that is something that happened to me in 2015. I basically took a leap of faith, not knowing where I'm going to land, to be very honest. And all these things slowly happened gradually. I was in a startup world for some time, in the e-learning startup, and then slowly came into the social sector. And again, here moving slowly from education to livelihood. So internally, there have been a lot of shifts that have happened. And what are the qualities that you need to have? And this applies to everyone who wants to get into the social entrepreneurship space. Is you have to be a go-getter. There is no doubt about it. You can't be sitting alone and saying, okay, things will happen automatically, somebody will do it for me. No, you have to be a go-getter. You have to get the things done yourself. And multitasking, a lot of people say we should not be multitasking, we should focus on one area. But no, I don't think it applies in the social sector. You have to be very flexible. You have to have a flexible work attitude. Sometimes you may have to take different tasks at a time. So you have to be a multitasker all the while. Risk, this is especially true for people who come from the corporate world. They need to take some risks in life to come into this world, because you never know what the outcome is going to be, what kind of sacrifices you are going to make. So risk-taking ability is very much important. The fourth most important is the networking skills that you need to build, before you even jump. So you should have a strong network. You should know people around you. If you keep those acquaintances alive, talk to people, have more friends and like-minded friends, connect with them. You may have to attend certain meetings, certain seminars. And today, in today's world, it's all about webinars. So you have to build that network. And the last one is you need to be a quick learner, adaptable to change. So I'll come back to that in the last slide, where I had to adapt to a lot of changes in my life, from the technology front, from the domain front. Because to be honest, I think I used only 30 to 40% or maybe less of my skills that I had gained in the corporate world. And most of the skills that I got, about 60 to 70%, were after joining a social sector, not before that. So you need to learn very quickly, adapt to change in your new life. Social entrepreneurship. Now, these are certain points that I put. If it's your cup of tea, if what, if when. So you want to participate in the problem-solving process of issues plaguing the country, because we have seen today we call it WhatsApp University, right? So people actively take part in forwards and make comments, or even in social media, they write about things they may not like, or it's very easy to be a armchair critic, sitting quite far away and making comments. But have you ever thought that you want to be there in the field of action and then make a difference to the society? No. So that never happens to us. We only love to make comments sitting quite far. So this is something that we all have to learn if you have to come into this sector, that you should not only be commenting or criticizing someone. We should be part of the problem solving process very actively, proactively. We should be part of that. Other thing is you don't step out of the comfort zone. Actually, you are giving it up completely. When you work in the social sector, you are actually working for a cause and the problem. When you meet people from all walks of life, each of them struggling with a set of problems, the field work, getting to know the depth of problems that persist in our society, the urge to solve them, and that brings a change which has no room for any comfort zone. So you have to forget the comfort zone that you enjoyed perhaps in the corporate world. Then you wish to be the change agent and contribute to the world. So working in the social sector gives you an opportunity to make a difference. The options are plenty, actually. You can pursue a cause that you feel most passionate about, and it could be related to environment, climate change, or it could be education related, sanitation and hygiene are just a few examples that I can give you. And you have to, and you need to strengthen your soft skills. Working in the social sector impacts your personal growth too much, actually. I know when I was teaching the young girl students in the Gurukula, So it was the first time that I was teaching young students, by the way. And I also learned gratitude, empathy. So when we work very closely and understand their problems, we start empathizing and we start contributing more efficiently to the problem solving process. And the last point is about you love to collaborate with several stakeholders. You certainly need to interact with many more people in the social sector, right from, say, donors, it could be corporates, or it could be high net worth individuals, or it could even be government, academicians, like-minded NGOs, because you can't do most of the things all alone by yourself. You may have to tie up with few NGOs, partner NGOs, like-minded NGOs. So that kind of partnership is required. And of course, the field level staff who are on the ground, because you can't be on the ground all the time. So you need to constantly collaborate with the people on the ground. On the right side, I was mentioning earlier, be the change you wish to see in the world. So this is something that all of us should have that particular phrase as our slogan in our day-to-day life. Now, few myths about social entrepreneurship. A lot of people they think, okay, social entrepreneurship, time pass, we just have to go and volunteer, donate some blood, give some old clothes, feed someone, feed the poor on the road. So that's what most of the people they feel. But not all social sector opportunities are voluntary, and not all pay you peanuts. Okay, because today the world is changing. You have a lot of NGOs, especially international NGOs, reputed NGOs, who pay a good pay packet, but you cannot compare that with the corporate world. Of course, I can't say that I shifted from, say, the corporate world from IBM and I came here and enjoying the same pay packet. No, certainly the lot of sacrifices that I've done in terms of the pay packet, but most of the people, they assume that no, going and joining an NGO is like doing voluntary work and not getting paid. So that is a myth that we need to bust. And second point is, you don't need a degree in social work. Like I just heard before this talk about a lot of work being done by you guys. You don't have a degree in social work, right? You are not MSWs, you're not from TISS, etc. But then you certainly got involved in a lot of NGO related activities, especially social entrepreneurship. I was hearing about it. So you don't need a degree in social work to do that. So that's another myth that we need to bust. And social impact organizations or social sector gives you diverse range of roles. If you say you love finance or accounting, yeah, you can still be in an NGO and do that. You can work in analytics, you can do finance and accounting. If you're in HR, you can also be part of an NGO. But importantly, somebody who has got good donor management skills, who can raise funds, those skills are more valued in an NGO, because unless you get the funds or the money, you may not be able to do a lot of things for the NGO. A lot of activities may get stalled because of funding. So that certainly is an important role. Then you have content management, and then you have marketing and communication. So these are all even research. So these are the areas that one can look forward to in a social sector. So not just simple pure volunteering that you will be involved. The next slide, it's again the same thing that I wanted to emphasize. It's not just about volunteering. So most of us we think that social sector is about blood donation camp, feeding the underserved, scholarships, raising scholarships for the poor, donating clothes. But that's not all. That's just, I would say, a tip of the iceberg. So there are a lot of things that we can do as part of the social sector. Importantly, strengthening government infrastructure. So at this point of time, I think now the post-COVID world, how important it is. Education, health, essential services, all are so important. I'll just give out some statistics. I'm sure you might have read in some of the reports. 48% of our fifth grade students, especially in rural areas or even in urban, they can't even read the second grade test. So there is second grade text. I mean, the textbooks of second grade, even a fifth grade student cannot read, and that forms 48% of such students. So this is really alarming. That is something lacking in the education space, in the education world. So something that NGOs can chip in. Improving the basic health indicators. 50% of women in India, they suffer from anemia. That is, they have very low blood, what you call the count, RCB count. So, and we are 114 out of 132 countries on stunting, that is stunted growth among children. And our infant mortality rate is 32 per 1,000 birth, and the global average is 12 per 1,000 birth. So we are quite low on this index overall in the world. So strengthening government infrastructure. The next is human rights. Child labor, for example, you have heard about Kalyan Satyarthi, right? You have heard about him. What kind of work he's doing? You know, he's a Nobel laureate from India, Kailash Satyarthi. So this is the area that he is working for, you know, the child labor. So as per 2011 census, there were 3 crore plus child laborers between the ages of 5 and 18, and in that 1 crore plus were between the ages of 5 and 14. So that's really alarming. So that's a huge number. And again, we rank poorly on that count as well in the world. The child human trafficking that's going on, women trafficking, sexual abuse, saving children from that, women, and conducting campaigns for societal awareness. So this is something on the human rights. On the social change, there are so many things. You must have heard about things like patriarchy, honor killing that's happening, drug addiction, alcoholism, prostitution. Out of 2 to 10 million commercial sex workers, 1 million are underage. That's really alarming. LGBTQ rights, domestic abuse. So these are certain areas where an NGO can contribute in bringing about social change. Economic security, I think this will be a lot important today, especially in the post-COVID world, about providing employability and building entrepreneurship ability among the youth, especially in the rural areas, developing farm or non-farm based livelihood options, increasing the income and reducing the risks related to the volatility of income, and ensuring that they do not migrate to the cities. That is more important now, because we have seen the impact recently when there was a lockdown, especially in a city like Bangalore, where I live. Almost 80% or more of the migrant population went back to their hometowns or their villages. Of course, some of them have started coming back, but then what about those who are there? You know, they need to be certainly given some employment opportunities there, or livelihood opportunity. 22% of India lives below the poverty line. And again, look at the index. 103 out of 100, we are 103 in 119 countries on the global hunger index, which is like having third of malnourished children in the world. Again, alarming statistics for us. Last thing, and actually the last one should be the first, but somehow we ignore, and even I have put that last. Environment. It is so important today. You know, I think most of us started analyzing why the COVID virus itself broke out, because of perhaps we abused environment, we abused Mother Nature, Mother Earth. So all these things have started coming up later. But we always give last preference to environment, like issues like deforestation, climate change, ozone depletion, soil conservation, waste management, green sources of energy. So there are a lot of things to be done in the environment space, which perhaps even the government is ignoring today, unfortunately. So there are a lot of things that that the NGOs or the social entrepreneurs can work towards building these 5 blocks. And I'm sure most of you might know about, it's not there in the slide, Sustainability Development Goals, which are called SDGs, defined by the United States, along with United Nations, sorry, not United States, United Nations, bringing together more than 130 countries in 2015. And it was a universal call to end poverty, protecting the planet, and also ensuring that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. So that was the goal that was set up. There were about 17 goals that United Nations have set up to be achieved by 2030. And what I understand so far, whatever update that I keep reading, the progress has been very tardy, very slow. Most of the countries, especially the lead nations like United Nations itself, is not taking these SDGs very seriously, especially on the environment. These are some things, environment and climate change. These are some things that all the countries need to be really serious about going forward. This slide is just like an annexure. I wanted to share my involvement in the social sector. So I've been visiting schools, not just in education, but also give awareness, creating awareness about environment, planting trees, etc. That is being done, especially through Happy World Foundation. So we have done a lot of such programs, going to the government schools in and around Bangalore, in Karnataka, where we highlight to them the importance of protecting environment and Mother Nature. And we also give them 2 saplings each to be planted near their house and to take care of them. And we target very young students, like 8 to 14, not more than 14 or not less than 8. 8 to 14 is the right set of or right age where we can really make some difference to them or influence them. So that's what we feel. And on the right side top, you see, of course, as part of some COVID-19 drives, some year with the volunteers. So we did a lot of grocery kit distribution drives to the migrant labor community, to the coolies or people who were daily wagers who had lost their income. So this was about 2 or 3 months into lockdown when we started providing them support. In the second block, you see the girls from the Gurukula with whom you saw in the first slide as well. So I did set up a STEM lab for them, a science lab with the support of one of the NGOs. And I teach basic computing, Vedic maths, spoken English on Sundays. And I also, the third one, if you see, there's a National Skill Training Institute for Women. It is called NSTI, where I mentor the girl students about career and livelihood opportunities. And again, I tell them, because most of these girls, they come from tier 2, 3 cities and even from small towns or villages. So I always tell them, no, you have to go back to your villages, create employment opportunities there, then be a beautician here or any of the skills to be used in the city. You have to go back to your place of origin, go back to the cities. So these are the things that I keep telling them. And the last one here on the right side, Mentor Together, is a platform where we mentor young college students. They come from very poor background, underprivileged background, who aspire to be entrepreneurs or they look forward to a successful career. So these are the college students, we mentor them. Now, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So how rightly said by Mahatma Gandhi. I wanted to end with this quote. And these are just my accomplishments. And yeah, I was talking about the skills. I've put that in the annexure. So look at the slide here on the left and right. So when I was in the corporate world, what skills I had, I brought now. Of course, those are not wasted. I've still brought them to the table and leveraged them here, like leadership, team management, soft skills. And basically, I come from an accounting and finance background, and then I moved to IT in the technology space. So there comes business analytics. Of course, I have to put MS Office. Without that, you can't survive. Project management, very important on the left side. Now, what are the new skills that I acquired? And all these were acquired after I was 47, by the way. So when I left the corporate world, I was 47. E-learning tool. So knowing the e-learning technology, digital marketing, social media marketing, including SEO, etc. Even producing short videos, infographic material, so that you see creatives, etc. So I started even learning that, designing the infographics, designing and developing even website. So even that I have done, which I've never done before, though I was in the technology space, but I've never done designing and developing website using WordPress. I did that. Marketing tools, including CRM, then MailChimp for campaigning, etc. So the other things are like the NGO operations, including volunteering. Of course, this is all new that I had to learn. And even volunteering, I was doing it for the first time after coming into the social sector. So I've not even been involved in basic volunteering before. Research and content management, fundraising, donor management, raising funds, a very critical role in an NGO. So that is something that I was involved. And of course, thanks to my network and thanks to the people I know in the industry, it was slightly easy for me in the fundraising aspect. So with this, I think I've come to the end of my presentation.
Okay, sir. So my question was that...
Can you say your name first? Sorry,
yeah, sorry.
I didn't get your name.
I'm Ruchika Upadhyay.
Okay.
You spoke to me in the start of the session about an...
Yes.
Yeah. So my question was that, firstly, sir, it was a wonderful session and very insightful. And many of the Enactus members did join. We all have a query, as in, did you have a revenue model in place for all of your projects? Or was it volunteering and non-profit work?
It's a very good question, actually, and which I've been emphasizing that even an NGO can generate revenue. And I've just heard you, Ruchika, before my session. But yeah, as of now, no, there is no revenue earning opportunity because we depend on funding from corporates. The CSR funding, corporate social responsibility funding, we use that to run our programs. But yeah, to answer your question, this is something very critical for NGOs to sustain in the long run. Is that you should always have an arm like that is in the works now. Now again, I think you mentioned that because of COVID, the plans have come to an hold. Same thing happened to us. We had to launch a program in the rural areas where we wanted to. We have already taken land on lease, okay, and we want the rural youth to do organic farming there, or it could be vegetables, it could be fruits, it could be even pulses, grains, grocery items. Even these could be organic and plastic free, etc. Because we are an environment friendly or environmental conscious NGO, so we wanted most of the products to be plastic free and wanted it to be green, environment friendly products, that we wanted to sell on our own platform through our sister organization. Because as an NGO, we may not want to have our own B2C platform, but we have a sister organization called Happy Gardeners, where we are planning a B2C platform where we'll sell the same products here without having the middleman involved. And it could also be rural handicaps as well, because we are even planning some products using khadi, and even we also talked about sanitary napkins as well, because we are tying up with an organization in Bangalore, in Malleshwaram, who make sanitary napkins out of, not the eco-friendly products actually. I don't have the details, but something like khadi, etc. So we are going to use that as the base material and make the women do that. And also there are a lot of things on khadi that we are planning in the villages, along with the women, provide them finance as well, not just ask them to do, but also provide them finance by tying up with some microfinance industries or even helping them get loans through Mudra. So all these are being planned. But last 2 or 3 months, we are really handicapped because we are not able to really go to the villages and start driving these programs. But we have a plan to be self-sustainable in the long run. That is a plan. And that is the way all NGOs should be, because you can't be going with a begging bowl all the time. Because whenever I attend the webinars, I always hear about NGOs crying, oh, we have to lay off people, we have to, we are not getting enough funding from the corporates. So we are laying off few people, we are going to shut down. Some people said we are going to shut down. So, but is that an option? So you still can be sustainable, right? By giving them some livelihood opportunity and selling them to the NGO.
Exactly.
So that is something, and being a finance guy myself, I can feel that pain. I can feel that pain of all NGOs just going with a begging ball always to the corporates, and corporates today they say because of COVID we can't or we are going to reduce the funding. Our budgets are we don't have a budget. We are given it to PM Cares. So this is the excuse that we are getting from corporates today. So it's a very good question, and I think that should be the model going forward for all the NGOs to be sustainable.
Yes, sir. I am done with my questions. The next one is Prinal here. Please take over, Prinal.
Okay, now I can see everyone.
Okay, thank you, Ruchika.
Yeah.
So my question is, most of your programs are based on rural areas. So how do you encourage people there to join your program?
Okay, actually, the program, see, I'll just give a recent example. There is a organization called KSLSA, Karnataka State Legal Services Authority. Okay, and though it is managed by the High Court of Karnataka, what they have is they have got their offices in all the rural areas of India. I'm not just talking about Karnataka, the entire India. So we went to them with a proposal saying that we need your help. So when you have to reach the rural areas, you can't do it alone. Let me tell you that. You can perhaps reach few villages around you, like in Karnataka, a few villages, or maybe in Bangalore is closer to even Tamil Nadu. So we can do few there. But yeah, if you have to grow pan-India, you need to have some kind of a tie-up with some government agency like what we did, KSLSA. So they said, let's do 2 villages on a pilot, and 2 villages quite far apart, not closer to each other. And based on the success, we'll take it to the next state and then perhaps pan-India. So that is how we have to grow, using maybe, leveraging some other NGOs or taking support of some other like-minded NGOs. So that's what I mentioned even in my presentation. When you talk about collaboration, It is so important for NGOs when they have to grow. They can't grow alone. Let me state the fact here. You can't grow alone. You have to grow along with other NGOs. Because I'll give you another example where I was talking to an NGO based in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. They don't have a presence in Karnataka, and we don't have a presence there. So it's all give and take, So your programs will do it here with our volunteers, and our programs you do it there with your set of volunteers, and they like that idea. So this is how the rural programs have to be done. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Is that what you're
Yes,
thinking?
sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
But yeah, to make that first impression in a rural village, I remember I had gone personally myself to a village close to Bangalore in Tamil Nadu. It was not easy. I remember the panchayat, the man who was running that, or rather the the mukhya, the panchayat head. It was so difficult to convince him. You'll bring lot of negative aspects. No, it will not work. This NGO has come, they have failed. So all kind of negative things you have to hear. But I'll
Yes,
also
sir.
tell you there are positive aspects, because there are few people who want the NGOs to come there and support, because they know it's for the good of them. Especially women. Okay, I'm happy that a lot of women are there in this group. So I'm always a proponent of women empowerment, because women understand the problems much more than men. So what we did is, we went to the panchayat guy's wife, and we were surprised. She could speak English fluently, and then she told us that, no, I want to do a lot of things for the village, but my husband does not allow me to do. It was a little shocking. Then we said, no, don't worry, you please support us, and we will empower you in whatever we can. But she was saying that, openly, that her husband does not support. So this is the challenge that you face in a village. So we then thought, okay, it's better to approach any programs through women and start women empowerment programs, which are much more successful than focusing only on men. The men will come and see, and then they'll start joining the women, is what we have seen in most of the rural programs.
It is inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So over to Nikki. Nikki, go ahead with your question.
Okay. I found your presentation very interesting. I just had a question where I noticed that you said that you were hoping that when you educate the girls, that you tell them to go. You were saying that you tell them to go back to their villages or the cities where they're from and look for opportunities there and to spread it there. And I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Okay. See, yeah, not all skill. I'm talking about NSTI here, because I think I mentioned about National Skill Training Institute for Women in Bangalore, where all the girls, or I would say 90% of the girls, come from villages. They're not from the cities, but they're big city dreams. And what happens in the big city dream? They come here, they think the city is great and all. I'm sure today after COVID, most of them have realized that cities are not the right option or not a viable option. It's better to be in a village. But then again, the problem with us is, our problem with our governance is that we have not created them enough opportunities in the villages. So there's no point saying, you go back to the village. They will ask you, so what will I go and do there? I've learned a beautician course. I can earn much better in Bangalore than say go to my village and find no customers there. So it's really tough to explain some of the skills like that. But if you look at skills like tailoring, for example, I'll take an example of tailoring, where you don't have to be in the city. Like today we have seen a lot of examples where women in the villages or in the small towns have tailored or have made masks. You must have read those stories, right? They've made masks which are going all over India and all over the world, not just India. They're going all over the world. Recently, I read about Mahbubani, I think. I don't know what that. It's from Bihar. No, Madhubani kind of art, which is being done by women from those villages, not in the cities. So these are some things that you can do. Nikki, you will also be surprised. You should read up on a few companies like Zoho. So Zoho, what they have done is, it's a classic example where they have their headquarters in a village called Tenkasi in Tamil Nadu. They're not in Chennai, though some of their key marketing staff is in Chennai. They have hired most of the people from the rural areas, and they're operating from the village called Tenkasi. So, even rural BPOs are now operating out of villages, and that's going to be the trend. All that they need is infrastructure, like they need a good Wi-Fi, they need to be given systems, computers or laptops, and of course some soft skill training, technical skills. They'll do much better because they don't have to spend time commuting. Like you are in Pune, I'm in Bangalore. How much time we spend in commuting, going to our office and coming back. They don't have that problem. They have the right home, what you call that, work-life balance, perfect work-life balance there. They can spend enough time. Yeah, some challenges are there, like Wi-Fi connectivity, etc. I think with all the 4G and now the next 5G coming up, these things will surely be ironed out in the near future. So this is how I tell these girls, go back to your village and maybe become an entrepreneur there rather than struggle in the city. You will be staying in a small one room with some 3-4 girls, PG accommodation, so expensive. They hardly save anything. And what will they send back? Rather, go to your village, create an opportunity there, and you become an entrepreneur there rather than seeking employment there. You become an entrepreneur. You'll be successful. So these are some thoughts or some ideas that I give them. But yeah, all of you might be wondering, what am I doing in a city? What am I doing in Bangalore? So even I have plans actually, not long, but yeah, maybe in the next couple of years to even go back to a village or a small place and not live in Bangalore or live in the city. So even I have that plan for your information. So.
But sir, I think that like while COVID has definitely like reduced a lot of opportunities and like made things harder, for at the same time, like regarding this topic, I think that a lot of the people that had to go home, like back to their villages, like for example, a lot of those girls that may have been like employed in big cities, like wouldn't they now actually have a good chance to like educate other people like during this time and like actually use their like entrepreneurial skills like at home now, because like they don't have an option to go back, they can't work outside, so they may actually be doing it right now. I think like if we took advantage of that situation and used it now, we could like your organization could do that, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely. I think all the suggestions that are coming from you and earlier, I'm sorry, I'm very poor in Ruchika, right? Who talked about sustainable model, sustainable model, and now Nikki. So the point that you have made is very much valid, and I think I need to talk to that the head of NST. I know him very well, the principal. I mean, that these girls have now gone back to the village. They're not in the city anymore. Okay, right. What they can do there is whatever they have learned here is what you have said, right? Whatever they have learned here,
yes,
become a train the trainer, right?
Right, exactly.
Yes. It's a very good suggestion, and I think I will talk to him and see what he has to say. But certainly, I'll give the credit to you. I'll say this a student called Nikki Puri who suggested that, and it's a wonderful idea. I'm not sure whether they're really implementing it. They should implement this, because once they have gone back and whatever they have learned, even if it is 70, 80 or whatever percentage of their learning, they should go and give it back to the village and create more such people, and create more such entrepreneurs. And hopefully NSTI should also recognize those girls or those women who are getting trained by them. So it's a very good idea, and I'm certainly going to talk to them. It's a government organization coming under Skill Development Ministry. NSTI comes under the Skill Development Ministry. So I'll certainly have to talk to them, because today it is shut down. Today the NSTI is shut down actually. I don't know what they're doing. Nobody is there today. And they don't have an online option as well, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
So this is a very good suggestion, which I think they will like it. Any more such suggestions? Because I think I'm getting more knowledge from you guys than you getting from me, perhaps. It looks like that. So a lot of new ideas, new things are coming up from you.
So I don't have a suggestion, but I have a question. In your presentation, I can see that there's a lot of mentorship. You're teaching a lot of skills to so many people from the underprivileged background. What are the challenges that you faced? Because that's an industry that even online we can tap, being wherever. So what are your challenges? Do they grasp well, or what is it like?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I can talk from my own experience. So I had a student from Hyderabad, and he was the son of an auto rickshaw driver. So coming from a very poor background, staying in a hutment, and he wanted to become I remember he wanted to become a banker or a chartered accountant. He was confused. So basically, it is not about skill training here, what I did in Mentor Together. It's more about soft skills training, improving their communication, also helping them become more, when you face an interview. Actually, the main challenge that they all face is their soft skills. They fail in their interviews, with their corporates, because most of the city guys do much better compared to them. Of course, he's from the city, but yeah, I would say more English medium, or the so-called elite school, elite college, students from that elite college or elite school. they get more precedence compared to people who come from the vernacular medium or who cannot speak English. So the main challenge here was the communications. How do you improve their, of course, overnight you cannot improve their English, spoken English or their communication. It requires a lot of sessions, And something that what didn't go right, maybe you pointed out, didn't go right was even pre-COVID. This was all pre-COVID. There was no face-to-face interaction, which I always kept telling mentor together that this model is not really effective because the guy is in Hyderabad, I'm here, and I prefer to be face-to-face with the person, so that I can understand his body language. I can tell him, how to go for an interview, or maybe a lot of tips that I can give him face-to-face. And give me Bangalore students, Bangalore-based college students, but that didn't happen. So somehow I felt that there was a need to bring the mentee in front of the mentor, not on the telephone or on a Skype call, or on a Zoom call. It is really not effective, to be very honest with you. And even today, whatever is going on, online teaching that is going on, I'm sorry, Sharad, maybe I have to say this, but to be very honest, this is not a real mode of teaching and learning. You have to be face-to-face with the teacher. You have to be in the classroom. You have to be with other students. You have to mingle with them, and then only you can share ideas and you can do a lot of things. Being online forever is not going to help. That is my take. I agree. I'm from the old school, so it's my take. Yeah.
No, you are absolutely all right. That yes, the online is not as effective as in person. However, given the situation right now, something is better than nothing. So, so this is where we are. Okay, I think we have almost. I know there may be multiple questions which you might have, students. However, considering the time as of now, we must stop. So feel free to maybe consolidate your questions, and maybe we can send one consolidated email to Mr. Arvind, and I'm sure he will be more than happy to answer some of your questions. And over to you, Vibhu. Vibhu, you're there with us?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Vibhu.
So thank you so much, Mr. Arvind Kamath, for taking out time and visiting our classroom to share your expertise with us. We gained valuable insight into your organization and career, and we are all inspired by it. We hope it was a positive experience for you also, and the information you shared with us was very enlightening. So again, my sincere thanks for supporting these social issues, and I wish your organization best of luck in future.
Thank you so much, Vibhu. And I look forward to the recording, Sharad.
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much, Arvind, for taking time out from your busy schedule and here with us. And indeed, it was very inspiring session, and I think all of us learned a lot here. You mentioned about various things which you have gone through, and I want to maybe on behalf of the students and on behalf of the college, I would like to maybe if you need some help in some of your activities, feel free to approach to me or any of our volunteers.
Sure.
And I'm sure we would be happy to see that how we can contribute given the situation right now with the COVID, and see how we can help in some of your activity.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much.